Just buy a Steam Deck, bro. Just buy a Steam Deck,
come
bro.
on!
Just buy a Steam Deck, bro.
I'm on the toilet!
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today we're going to be doing a 6-month review of the Steam Deck OLED. I did a full review on this when it came out, and if you want a quick rundown of my thoughts at that time, I loved it, but Linux isn't my operating system of choice. So I know that a lot of people love SteamOS, they love Linux and all that sort of thing, but I am a Windows guy through and through. So it just became a device where I love a lot of it and I use it a lot, but it isn't my perfect device. It isn't the one that I'm looking for. It's just the one that I have right now. On my end, I had the Steam Deck LCD about 4 different times. I would buy it and use it for a month and then get rid of it because it just never fit what I wanted. And I kept going through this process with the Steam Deck LCD. And then finally, the Steam Deck OLED came around, and I love this thing. It is fantastic in so many different ways. I didn't find this to be just a simple revision. It changed a lot of the Steam Deck LCD. The OLED edition, the upgraded battery life, the weight distribution, it was just a better upgrade overall compared to the LCD, to the point where to me it was a night and day difference, where I can't even consider the LCD even anywhere close to what the OLED is. So fast forward 6 months, and I've used this now extensively over that time because it's been my only x86 that has stayed in this house for that time. So we can talk a bit about what my experience has been. So let's talk about what my actual use cases are for this first. And it's basically just an indie game machine with some light emulation. I don't exactly mean indie, but you know what I mean. It's the lower powered games that will run at maxed out frame rates and resolution on the deck. So a lot of Balatro, Hades, Dead Cells, Danganronpa, Persona, games like Yakuza, and similar to that. For me, this list does not include games like Helldivers or Baldur's Gate 3 or harder to run games. It's always amazed me to see those games at the top of the list for every month on the charts of what's being most played on a Steam Deck, because I just can't deal with how those run on the deck. It's just not for me. There is a lot of times where I'm okay with a locked 40 FPS, as long as it's locked and it's not dipping. But for most of those scenarios, I've just kind of stopped doing it on the deck. If it's not doing a 60 frame rate, I kind of don't want to do it here, and I'm just going to go do it on my computer, or I'm going to stream it. And we'll talk about that later. And that is one of the biggest things that I noticed over the last 6 months. I wanted more power. The amount of games that I've wanted to play on the Steam Deck has shrunk over time because just the lack of power, and more games are coming out that require more power, and the Steam Deck is just getting left behind. It just can't catch up, and that's not a fault of its own. It's old technology at this point, and it's done fantastic to be relevant still to this day. But for somebody like me who wants to play a lot of the newer titles and they wants to play them on the go, it just doesn't fit that lifestyle. Since the Steam Deck is released, there's been a lot more competition nowadays. There's the ROG Ally, the Legion Go, and a whole host of other INEO devices and GPDs and all of that. And the one constant is they have a lot more power, but they have negatives in other ways. It could be battery, it could be comfort, it could be a bunch of different things. The Steam Deck is the one that does kind of everything in a jack-of-all-trades scenario, but power is the one thing that it's being left behind on. And you wouldn't really feel these negatives unless you had access to those types of devices. So I have a GPD Win 4 somewhere around here, and playing on that and then going to the deck is a night and day experience for power. And you start to notice it really quickly, and then it becomes a scenario, well, I kind of just want to play it on the Win 4 instead of this because I can have access to a lot more games than I do on the Steam Deck OLED. And that's kind of where I'm at. But like I said, those devices have their own hosts of negatives too. In the case of the Steam Deck, it becomes a scenario where I want to use it for more than what it can do, but I feel held back in that power scenario. So it ends up being a scenario where the games that I actually play on the Steam Deck OLED are not always all the games that I want to play. It's just kind of curated list of ones that I found work well on here and I can get away with it. But then that just leads to a scenario where I need 2 different x86 devices to meet my needs, and you can see where I'm going with it. Now, the deck has so many different strengths compared to other x86 devices. The battery life is top out of everything. Comfort is probably the best that I can think of. SteamOS is fantastic for new users and for just general public just trying to get into PC gaming. And then something that isn't talked about a lot, but the fan. The fan is never on. I never hear this fan. It is great. It is one of the best fans because I'm assuming it's running in a low power mode. And if I hear it, I don't even know if I hear it. It exists. It does whatever it needs to do without me hearing it. And that's the part that I love. And so that's what I mean about the deck being the best all-rounder device. And in a lot of cases is the best in a lot of different scenarios, but power is never one of them. It is not the best in power as we've come to see. So it ends up being a scenario where are you going to trade off a lot of the other negatives from other devices for power alone, or are you just going to stick with the Steam Deck OLED over the last 6 months and enjoy just playing games that are a little bit more curated than what you would normally expect from another device? On the emulation front, I actually don't use the Steam Deck OLED for emulation at all, at least for some of the normal emulation. There's certain things where it only happens on the Steam Deck OLED, like Xbox 360 emulation or PS3 or scenarios like that. But for the most part, I'm using my Odin 2 or Odin 2 Mini nowadays and other devices just because it fits my needs more. This is very big, and I don't need to bring this around with me to play PlayStation Portable or GameCube or Wii. So I have other devices for that. You could do that on here, but one of the things I did notice is the Odin 2 and Odin 2 Mini will upscale a lot higher than the deck does, and performance-wise is a lot better than the deck is. But the deck has better compatibility because x86 emulation progress is a lot faster than what we don't have on Android anymore. Now, that's not to say that the Steam Deck OLED is bad for emulation in any way, shape, or form. Of course it isn't. A lot of times I use this for Nintendo 64 emulation because the x86 RetroArch doesn't have issues with a lot of the N64 games that Android does. It is a very niche, weird scenario, but for some reason, N64 on x86 devices can play a lot more than Android does. And I think it's Pokemon Snap was one of the games that I remember, as well as Mario Golf were the two that for some reason on Android, big problems if you want to get retro achievements in RetroArch. The cores just won't work, but on x86, you can fix everything that you need to and get them to work. It's very weird. But obviously, like I said before, the Steam Deck OLED can emulate a lot more systems than the Android counterparts can do for Odin 2 and Odin 2 Mini. So Wii U, PS3, Xbox 360, all of that. And then Switch becomes a battle between Android versus Linux. And a lot of times this comes out ahead for Switch, of course. And so when I do want to emulate to a TV for those systems, I am using the Steam Deck OLED, and I use a dock. And as far as a dock goes, that brings me to today's video sponsor, Ugreen. And they have a 9-in-1 dock that allows me to connect the Steam Deck OLED to a TV and gives you a whole bunch of more ports as well. There is an adjustable stand to tilt the device and it keeps it upright comfortably. There's 2 USB-C 10GB per second ports on top of the actual 100-watt fast charging port. There's gigabit Ethernet, 3 USB-A ports, the HDMI port, and it supports up to 4K 60, and there's even an SD card slot too, for even more games to add because I don't have enough. The deck only charges up to 45 watts, but since this is made for the ROG Ally and other devices too, and those charge higher, the extra wattage bandwidth is key. You can use this with the deck, the Ally, the Legion Go, the Claw, and so much more. Even iPads and Surface Pros if you have them. So for me, I connect it to my TV using the HDMI port, gigabit Ethernet, USB-C charging, SD card in the slot, and USB for my controller. And it just covers every single base for what a dock should do. Check out the link in my description to grab this Ugreen 9-in-1 Steam Deck dock if you need one. That sort of brings me to the other scenario that I noticed over the last 6 months, and that is just that 800p is not doing it for me anymore. If I want to stream games, the last device in my collection that I will stream to is the Steam Deck OLED. Despite the fact that it has an OLED screen, which is great, the 800p resolution just holds it back a lot nowadays. Don't get me wrong, the majority of the world will be okay with 800p, and I'm sure they are. But when you have access to 1080p devices and you're streaming, in which case the actual device doesn't matter, and it's really the controls and the panel and all of that, this just becomes the last option available to me just because of that 800p resolution. And even playing actual PC games, it really starts to show its age. Like I said before, when you compare it to ROG Ally, Legion Go, Win 4, a bunch of different x86 devices that aren't stuck on 800p or 720p screens, it becomes very noticeable that the deck is behind. Once again, this is a case of the deck being years old at this point, and we are now in 2024 with a whole bunch of different options available to you when it comes to x86 devices. And there's flaws, of course, when it comes to any device, and these are the ones that I'm noticing on the Deck OLED. And so I think up until this point, it probably sounds like I am ragging on the deck a lot and really going hard on it, but that is not what I mean. Like any review that I do, have to talk about the negatives of a device, even if I love it. And these are just the shortcomings that I found over the last 6 months. But I really like this. I wouldn't have kept it for this long if I didn't. It is unmatched in battery life. It is unmatched in comfort. It is unmatched in ease of use from the actual operating system point of view. For SteamOS, for a lot of people, this is the easiest way for you to get into PC gaming and experience an OLED screen and all of these benefits. Like I said before, there has been a lot of competition for x86 devices, but nothing has come close to a total package scenario than the Steam Deck. There is really nothing else. We had the ROG Ally, the original one. The battery life was abysmal. The rest was great, but battery life and comfort, in my eyes, weren't there compared to this. The Legion Go, you need to be a monster to be able to hold comfortably. Win 4 has issues with heat as well as the fan, and I can keep going, but the point is, the Steam Deck OLED is the best just all-rounder device for a lot of people, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be the perfect device for everybody. I said it before, but my preference for operating system is Windows, and it's always going to be Windows, and don't at me, because it's just my preference. One of the reasons I grabbed the Steam Deck OLED originally was due to the Windows upcoming support. Valve did it for the Steam Deck LCD, where we had drivers, and Windows on the Steam Deck LCD was actually really good. For anybody that's used it, it is really good. Came to the OLED and Valve said, yeah, we are working on it. On the drivers page, still says, yeah, we're working on it. It has now been over 6 months and we have had zero news on drivers for Windows on the Steam Deck OLED. I'll be honest, that doesn't feel great. And I get it. You shouldn't be buying a device for a feature that doesn't exist yet. My own fault. And I like a lot more of the deck to negate that. But I was counting on it. And if it's dead and they're not doing anymore, then just say that instead of continuing to provide hope for those that are waiting on Windows for the Steam Deck OLED. I think it's important to call this out because a company that's known for keeping promises, like Valve, should be called out when they don't keep their promises. And you could say that, yeah, it's still coming, but at what point, if the Steam Deck 2 comes out, then it won't matter anymore. And so that comes to my wrap up here. The Steam Deck OLED has been fantastic over the last 6 months. It has been my perfect x86 device in a lot of different scenarios, but it is not my perfect x86 device for what I am looking for. It is currently just the best device available right now. Personally, I have my eyes on the ROG Ally X. The Ally, like I mentioned before, battery life and comfort were two things that I had major issues with, and those look to be solved with the Ally X. But on top of that, despite the fact that it's going to be an IPS panel, and obviously not as good as OLED, it has 1080p and it has variable refresh rate, along with all of the power and windows and so much more. So it is kind of more in line with what I'm looking for. I did mention it before, but I do find that variable refresh rate is kind of a necessity in 2024 with how games are running nowadays. And so that's just another added benefit to other devices that the Steam Deck OLED doesn't have. The x86 world is full of compromises. You can't get away from that. But the Steam Deck OLED is probably the best jack-of-all-trades device to just cover anybody's needs that are just jumping into the space. And it is going to still be my default recommendation for pretty much anybody new to this hobby. But sometimes you just want more. That's going to be it for this one. Don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow. Come join me on the Discord to yell at me for not giving a unanimously praising review to the Steam Deck OLED. Support me on Patreon if you like my videos, and hope you all have a good one.